Phillips, in August 1963, Mr. Cooke joined the fledgling College of Arts and Science as an accountant in charge of finance and accounts, and served with distinction until his retirement in 1994. He brought to this new endeavor the experience and expertise gained through his service at the Colonial Development and Welfare Organization from 1948 to 1958, and with the federal government of the West Indies from 1958 to 1963. Ever conscious of the need to bring the best expertise to this position, he undertook studies in business administration, and in 1969 received the Diploma in Business Administration with high distinction from the Waterloo Lutheran University. The 15 grade A's from 16 courses earned him the Wall Street Journal Student Achievement Prize. Mr. Cooke was tenured in 1970 in recognition of the quality and scope of the outstanding contribution that he had made to the management of the university finances. In 1973, with the establishment of the Faculty of Law, and in recognition of the additional responsibility generated by the rapidly expanding campus, the position of accountant was upgraded to finance officer, and Mr. Cooke was promoted to that position. Again, ever conscious of the need to bring the most current education and training to his position, in 1984, Mr. Cooke completed a course in computer operations for university accounting and enhanced use of computer facilities. And he participated in the British Council-sponsored program in University Administration at Andrew University, Edinburgh, Scotland. In 1990, he was promoted to the campus bursar position. And although he had made plans to retire in 1991, he agreed to the Vice Chancellor's request to give the campus another 3 years. He eventually retired from the Cayfield campus in 1994. So we have a stalwart who has spent several years with the university in the most senior positions. He would have started, I think, at the inception of the campus at the Harbor site, and he will work with 3 principals during that period. And I know it's somewhat difficult working with principals, Principal. So if you can survive 3 principals, you have done extremely well. So he's done extremely well in terms of serving this campus and serving this community. In recent times, I've seen the work of Mr. Cooke in support of the university. He has sought to explain the whole process of budgeting within the university in an article I saw in the press. And he has raised his own voice in support of the government continued payment of fees for university students. So on retirement, he has not been a silent voice for the university, but has been a very vocal voice for the university. And therefore, we are happy to commend him on this special occasion and recognizing his work within the university by naming this section of the university after him. And I want to invite my principal and Pro-Vice Chancellor to give remarks. Principal?
The issue of managing the finances of a university, it's something that can either overwhelm you or you can learn to take it for granted. You can either assume that quietly behind the scenes, all of the financial matters are being taken care of, all of the accounting procedures are being taken care of, and the university goes along very smoothly, very efficiently run, everything's in order. You can assume that this is happening by automation. Or you can assume that there is a remarkable brain and tremendous competencies behind the process. You know, I was always fond of that statement by Einstein, that the guy who invented the first wheel was a very ordinary fellow. but the guy who invented the other three to allow for movement, no, that was a real genius. And so university can move along on its four wheels quite smoothly. And you can assume that somehow the principal is responsible for this. If you believe in that, then you believe in mythologies. Principals oftentimes are the passengers who sit, or might be the driver who sit in the vehicle, but there is an engine that allows that vehicle to work, and invariably that engine is in the bursary. I am not suggesting that the bursar is therefore a mechanic, though he has to be, but he has to be much, much more. Because in the case of KFIL in Barbados, we expect of our bursars to have our engines so finely tuned that we get increasing amounts of mileage out of less input to fuel. And therein lies the issue. What do I mean by that? My understanding of Cave Hill as a campus, in contrast to our sister campuses, is that we really operated from the beginning with a scarcity model. We really started out and continued with a scarcity model. Over the 30-odd years, and I have spoken to many principals at the other campus over the years, I would oftentimes be amazed by the fact that each year in their budgets, they got things like grants from their governments. They got monies for buildings. They got funds for research, and they used to get all these wonderful things to keep their campuses going. Barbados was a scarcity model. My understanding is that the strategy for the KFIL campus has been that the government of Barbados have said, we are going to pay 100% for the students, the economic cost of tuition, which was a commendable model, and long may it last. But the government have said, well, okay, we cannot give you monies every year for buildings, for development, for infrastructure. We cannot give you money for research and all of those high-end things. But we will keep the core. Which was suggesting that a bursar at KFIL has to be a very special creature. How do you get water out of stone? It's a mystery to me how KFIL has grown in its first 40 years. I cannot understand. I have asked Keith many hard questions. I do not understand how KFIL developed within a scarcity funding model. How did the campus secure monies for its physical expansion if it wasn't in the budget? I once tackled Sir Keith in a bank on this question. I said, Keith, I was there as your dean, but how on earth did you secure monies for the physical development of the campus? The explanation he gave is that between himself and Victor Cooke, they had something called efficiency gains, where you constantly reduce your expenditure. You constantly increase the efficiency of your expenditure. And you're always looking for savings, and you would cut through little small accounts to accumulate small pockets of savings. Stitch them together, you get a little something, and then you put up a building. Well, it seems to me that there's an element of magic, Victor, involved in all of that. And and in your time, from the very beginning at St. Michael's School, keeping the accounts together, financial projections, move into the harbor, and then come into KFIL campus to build an infrastructure that is now a modern campus, and to lay the foundation for it. In that funding model, that was a mission impossible, but you did it. And you ought to be congratulated for doing it. We all know that Victor Cooke was rough and tumble. We all know that Mr. Cooke did not tolerate irresponsibility. He did not tolerate deviance. He did not tolerate wastage, because of course he could not in that environment. There was no room, there was no space in that environment. There was no room and there was no space in that accounting and fiscal structure for any of those things. And so I believe that what he has left behind for us at KFIL is a culture of efficient financial husbandry, where we take our scarce and oftentimes diminishing resources and we manage them skillfully, carefully, with intolerance to wastage. And this is important. This is important. And I believe that this asset that KFIL has built into its bursary is what has served it well over the years. I was a dean in the early 1990s when financial difficulty struck this campus, and I was sitting right there watching Sir Keith and Victor keep the campus together during very, very difficult times. Those times are upon us again. And sometimes I must confess that I feel a little relaxed, in the sense that there is a sense of having been there before. There is a sense that there is a precedent. We have been through this before, and we have seen how to handle these situations, and we have had a best practice in how to do that. And what's a best practice? A best practice, in my judgment, in our context, is a practice that says we put our full financial circumstance on the table, we look at it, we say, well, what is the primary objective? The primary objective is to make sure that everyone keeps their jobs, that we do not send home anyone. That is the primary objective. We keep the family together, and we do what we have to do with our costs, our expenditure, to maintain that objective. Now, we have done that before, and I certainly hope that, Lisa, that we can do it again. I would wish to commend Mr. Cooke for his contribution not only to the KFIL campus, to the University of the West Indies, to build a first-class international university in a region that is not known for sustained economic growth. And if you consider that Jamaica, our largest economy, has not had economic growth for 25 years. When I went to Jamaica in 1979, the GDP of Jamaica then was greater than it is now. The largest economy in free fall, impacting the university. And Barbados, with its cycles of growth and decline, but yet we've had to maintain a first-class university in such an environment where we are heavily dependent upon government resources. It is fitting then that we celebrate our distinguished bursars. I was very proud, and I'm sure many of the stalwarts of the university here were very proud when Mr. Preston became the Vice Chancellor for his services to the university. And here at KFIL, we grew up in an environment recognizing that the campus was in safe hands because Mr. Cooke was at the financial helm. It oftentimes meant tough negotiations with governments, sitting with governments at TSC, at UGC, going through the financial items, insisting upon certain standards of support for the institution. And sometimes it was very difficult because the resources were just not there. And we had to get resources that were not there, and Mr. Cooke behaved very well. Well, you know, they say that the true mark of a gentleman is not how he behaves under normal circumstances. The true mark of a gentleman is how he behaves while he's misbehaving. And you can misbehave like a gentleman. And I know that Mr. Cooke had a difficult time with the TSC meetings in UGC to get the resources for the campus in a difficult environment, in a very difficult environment, and he has left those skills behind. And he has done it all very well, because just look at him. Look how well he looks. He ought not to be looking so well given what he ought not to be looking so well given what he has gone through. But obviously he had the gift. He had the gift, and that gift has served him and this university very well. And so it really is a pleasure for us, for the Cahill family, to recognize Mr. Cooke in this way. We looked around the plant and we tried to find a place that would make him feel at home. Now, we all knew that he occupied the office up here. And this is a place where many of us were afraid to go. Because that was a place, as I said, that did not tolerate any proposal. As you've heard from Woodville, if you went to Cooke, you better go with a finely tuned, well-designed, well-thought-out concept. Otherwise, you'll be told that there are no resources. And so we have put him here. Mr. Cooke, this is where you have been for all those many years. This is where your footprint, and this is where your spirit resides. It is fitting that you should be in the building you inhabited, and critically, in the building that now represents our latest faculty, the Faculty of Medical Sciences. So a stalwart then is given oversight to the newest sibling in the family. And I think that it fits a sense of circularity, but a sense of order. And in that sense, Victor, let me say how pleased, can I get help with this? Can I say how pleased it is, I am, that all of us at Cahill rose up with alacrity to support this naming in your honor. Congratulations, and thank you so very much.
One of the persons that Mr. Cooke would have worked closely with was former principal Sir Keith Hunt. And therefore, he's aptly placed. In fact, there's an article that I came across in which he was speaking about Mr. Cooke, in which he said, from August 10th, 1963 to Friday of this week, you have served the university with dedication and loyalty in the successive offices of accountant, finance officer, and campus bursar. And that your career is a case study of what can be achieved by the combination of sound education, integrity, industry, continuous learning, and mastery of the management skills, and commitment backed by the love and support of your dear wife, your dear mother, and other members of your family. And during your tenure at the Cahill campus, Mr. Cooke was intimately involved in the transformation of the institution from a fledgling College of Arts and Science to a modern campus, and especially in the construction of many of the physical legacies which are part of the campus landscape. And these included the law building and its extensions, the social science block, the administrative building, the biology wing, the bookshop, and the Roy Marshall Teaching Complex. Right, so you have a legacy of providing some resources. So he has said that the government does not provide those resources for us, but clearly through efficiencies, auditing, you were able to provide those resources, which has allowed the campus to expand and to grow. I now invite Mr. Keefe to come and give remarks.
Let me make a few observations in relation to the context in which we have moved from I came in 64, Victor and others, as Eddie Ball has labeled us, were the Aborigines. The Aborigines were those who were recruited in 1963 to 1964. I came in September 64, and I missed it, therefore, by a year, but not by much. As far as I can tell, there was no preordained plan to have a campus in Barbados then. The university, under Sir Arthur Lewis, thought that the model, and Sir Woodville Marshall made this very clear in his excellent presentation in the lectures, because there are two promoters, Sir Arthur Lewis, coinciding with Mr. Errol Barrow and his plans for higher education in Barbados. But Sir Arthur Lewis recognized that it was important to start somewhere, to break out of the model of a rather cloistered, and it's my alma mater, I'm not knocking it, I enjoy being in the cloister, but for a limited number of students in the good old English tradition, and the needs of the contributing territories. And consequently, soon after the university became autonomous, fast-tracked discussions and plans to enable it to better serve the needs of the region. And hence, the College of Arts and Science started. Those of us who worked here had to deal with having to deal with a 3-year program with quite often 2 members in a discipline, 3 members in a discipline, etc. But we survived largely because there was always a second row of very competent people, for the most part, in the community, who made their services available for us as what the Americans call adjunct faculty. And I think we have to, as they say, big up these. They have continued to contribute to the buoyancy of the delivery of our teaching program. I make that point because when Sir Hilary refers to the preeminence, he didn't use the term of the office of bursar, and I know Mr. Cooke will deal adequately with that if he cares to. But if I may just anticipate what he may say, it was not always so. The early days of the campus, the university was highly centralized in its administration. And indeed, it was only with the establishment, the decentralization that came with the establishment of campus councils, that we had the duty and the responsibility to plan and put up proposals for the next 3 years at each campus. Still had to be confirmed, as I think Hilary, you said on another occasion, by the University Central Committee. Thereafter, we had to see that we managed those resources well, and since at the beginning there was no fat in the budget, then any extras had to come from other sources, and there were other sources, but this is not the place to say that. But I make that point by saying that even before that had started, we benefited from the, and I'm glad to see you refer to the late A.Z. Preston. A.Z. Preston was a bursar at Mona, but before that he was an established accountant, and he effectively became very adept at developing systems of financial management and supervision. He didn't have to create them from scratch. We were offshoots of the University Grants Committee tradition, dealing in that case, however, with a single government. The challenge was to craft that, to tweak it, so that it can relate fairly to all the contributing governments, but with a situation that if you have a government on your doorstep, like you are dealing with the government of Jamaica and there's one campus, if you are then dealing with the St. Augustine campus and its expansion, and you're dealing with a government with capacity to pay, then you have two growth areas that, if not properly managed, could have led to the marginalization of the non-campus countries, including Barbados. And I think that I've always had great respect for his remarkable career, where when he became Vice Chancellor, and I thought that his innings as Vice Chancellor was certainly one of continued growth of the university, where he had considerable empathy. But I come now to his impact on the bursarial staff across the campuses. He took a keen interest, naturally, as he is the senior person, in the recruitment. More importantly, he took a keen interest in sharing information about challenges, etc. And I know for a fact, therefore, that Mr. Cooke benefited from that family where he and his colleagues would not go to Mono without effectively taking an opportunity to go and discuss with him. Very important because, hey, the university is celebrating 50 years. Name the other institutions as a region that have survived. So I'm saying I'm not attributing this, I'm saying the structure, the regional character of the university, and the fact that we have spent a great deal of time, and we continue to spend, to seek to preserve that regional character, is worth reminding ourselves of. But now, Mr. Cooke then was part of that team that provided excellent management for the finances of the university. The recruitment of personnel, the management of personnel, and let me say that I don't share the view that even before I came across to the office upstairs that I dreaded going across to the bursary. Rather, I would not do that unless I had called. Secondly, Victor knew whether I was head department or dean. When I came for help, not to demand resources. And yes, I didn't have to get it right first time, because I would be advised, well, perhaps I heard you say that you wanted it for this. Perhaps if you wrote to me in this way, and that was direct AZ question, if you wrote me in this way, I will be able to find the resources. And let's be clear, these resources had to come from unallocated things within certain limits, and they had to be for purposes, because I come now to the point. The university has again avoided being the center of a scandal, because our business is public property. This expenditure, even if the funds, the source of funds, is an external source, government, a donor, every year the accounts of the university must be managed, and I'm not sure I've heard a single occasion when there was an apology for late submission of audits. And that was very important, but it's not general. I come then to Mr. Cooke. What Victor brought to this community at Cave Hill was, as you quoted, sir, integrity. He brought a personality that enabled him to go outside of the parameters of the bursary offices and relate to people, not necessarily on bursary basis, but because they had a frown on their face. And he felt that perhaps he could point them in the right direction. It is important, therefore, that we recognize that he's left behind a tradition of leadership in the bursary and on the campus, that he's left behind persons who would have benefited from the support systems that he has set up. And as a result, we continue to be indebted to persons like Victor Cooke for the progress that we continue to make, I almost said at a dizzying pace, under my successor. Congratulations to you, the very best to you and your family, very well deserved.
Leadership is at the core of any successful manager. And the development of those under your charge is also extremely critical. I was observing the poster there, and I noticed that within a picture there are two other bursars that succeeded after you, Morris Webster and Alice Dalrymple. And that shows that you spent time developing the people around you. And that is important as a manager. We have to recognize that there are people who are there who we are working with, and we need to spend some time also bringing them along so that when we go on, there are people to succeed us. And I commend you for that, because I think for HR professional like myself, I always look to that to see how managers actually develop the organization. And I think I must commend you for that. Let's give you an applause for that particular area of development. You would have worked as well with the gentleman I just mentioned, Mr. Andrew Lewis, who was campus registrar for a significant period of time, about 12 years. So about that. And therefore, he would have been the other half of the administrative sector at the university during those periods. And he may be best placed to give us those insights about how you all were able to manage some of these resources and the people within that period. So I now invite Andrew Lewis to bring remarks.
For me, this is a fantastic occasion. It is a great honor and a privilege for me to be asked to pay a tribute to our distinguished honoree, Mr. Victor Cooke. This is a great happening. I came in 1982, and I got early notice to stay far away from a gentleman called Victor Cooke. He's a no-nonsense man. But I'll come to that in a minute. When Sir Keith and the principal spoke of Ashton Preston, I have to say that when it was decided or announced that the university had agreed to honor Victor in this way, my mind went straight to Ashton Preston. After whom a hall of residence has been named. And I was reflecting as to whether there are other financial managers of this university after whom a building has been named as a way of honoring such persons. I have a feeling, Victor, that following Preston, you're the first. And that gave me a great deal of personal satisfaction, having worked with you for, I believe, about 30 years or so. And recognizing that it is not normal for bursars to have been recognized in this university. Others have spoken of your trajectory from accountant through financial officer through bursar and so on. Many of you here may not have heard of Ashton Preston, but his trajectory was from being an accounts clerk right through to being principal, vice chancellor of this university, and vice chancellor of this university, which is a tremendous feat. And it is a measure of his contribution and his distinguished service to the University of the West Indies. Now, we're not going to make that big claim for you, Victor, but there are so many similarities between your contribution to this campus and university and Aston Preston's contribution. So in fact, this is a very fitting way of recognizing you. Cooke spoke of that in a different way, but I really observed that close relationship that existed between yourself and Sidney Martin and later on Cooke, and thought that part of the calmness with which the campus proceeded and the sense of security that we experienced had to do with that degree of cooperation and collaboration, that teamship that existed at that level. I should also tell you that when I was told stay away from the bursary as far as possible, at the time you were described as the second most powerful man on the campus. But I think that is normally said of people who run the finances of an organization. So having come from a place where I knew the Minister of Finance was really the boss, and the Prime Minister only the boss if he's also a Minister of Finance. But you know how long ago that was? I can't possibly be thinking of the present. Let me quote from Woody Blackman, who was a colleague of Victor, not only in the university but in the Methodist Church. He wrote, "At Cape Hill, Victor Cooke created in his department an atmosphere of calm efficiency. Financial crises never took Cape Hill by surprise because of Victor's foresight, born of experience, and his innate prudence." I think we can all endorse that. But I think the full significance of your role in the sustainability, in the expansion and growth of the campus may not be fully realized without some awareness, touched on briefly by others, but perhaps would need some extension. Some awareness of the financial environment in which the campus operated over those many years. Because only then will it be possible to appreciate that the campus, Sir Hilary, was always in a balancing act. I think I sense we lived always on the edge. There was always this need for careful financial planning and even frugality. And that is why I think, Victor, you acquired so many epithets like, you know, the hard man, the stingy man. I want to give an explanation for that before you begin to speak. For example, it may not be well known, I certainly became aware of it in the 80s, I had come in 1980, that as of March 1988, the government of Barbados was indebted to the University of the West Indies, primarily to the Cape Hill campus, by some $84 million. Now, the bulk of that would have been due to Cape Hill campus insofar as this would have been largely the Barbados government's financial responsibility. But let me say that other governments were equally in debt to the university, and perhaps more so. That is an indication of the situation in the 80s. What was the situation in the 90s? I was certainly aware, as Sir Keith pointed out, and perhaps Hilary, of the torture that we experienced when soon after the budget was approved by the governments, by the grants committees, we were advised that it would be cut by $25 million. That was a lot of money in those days. It still is. And this was on top of the fact that the governments were in severe arrears to the University of West Indies. So that is the financial environment that we experienced, and which was the responsibility of Victor Cooke to manage. We know in retrospect that he managed these exceedingly well. My reflections suggest that there were a number of base elements in that Victor brought to this job and to that development. The first touched upon briefly was, I think, the matter of financial integrity. His leadership and management established and then maintained the financial integrity of the university's finances. Yes, it is true to say that its annual audited accounts were presented precisely on time and that they were never qualified by the auditors. That is also true. It is also true that Victor then embedded in the bursary and across the campus a culture of financial integrity and probity. This was his legacy to his successors, Morris, yes, Ken, Anis, and has been inherited by our bursar, Lisa. This feature is absolutely critical to the university, so much so that building on Victor's legacy, the university after that went further and strengthened that aspect of its operations by the institution of internal management auditors, and of course establishing an independent audit review committee which reports directly to council. So that your contribution, your legacy, of course, was fully observed in that process. Financial integrity is critical to the survival of the university. Another characteristic I observed was that of financial planning, and Sir Keith mentioned it, financial prudence. Our budgets, as Hilary rightly said, and Sir Keith recalled, never met our needs. But throughout the time I was here, I saw needs being met that were not addressed in the budget. That was prudence. What I observed was a method which suggested to me that you needed always to put something aside, to do something more. And that the priorities, as Hilary said, was first parole, then national insurance. Pay was not so important because it belonged to the government anyhow. Provision to sustain the essential elements of the teaching programs, keep the lights on, the water running, and of course our creditors satisfied. You spoke of efficiency gains. The remainder went into this box. Also, in relation to that, I thought was that he was a genius at cash management. He used to say, money is better in my hand than in the creditor's hand. I can do so many things with it until they got paid. They call it, I think, a treasury function. So while I am waiting to be paid, that money is earning money to pay somebody else as well. So I thought that Victor was a master at that. Of course, another aspect, another tactic was what we all recall as Victor's penchant for saying no. That was his first response. You make a request and he would say no. Well, if you were satisfied with no, the request was really not significant, not sustainable. So we learned if we wanted to succeed, that we had, as Woodville said, to produce a cogent, finely argued position. And as Cooke said, he would say, I will write you on that. And he would write you in a form that allowed him to justify the source of funding. But you got what you wanted. Another trait I thought was your financial acumen. Now, we were lucky on this campus, Woody, yourselves, Sydney, Sir Keith, in having recruited a man they called, Woody Blackman called him, the best builder in the Caribbean. A man called Jim Hall. I'm sorry he's not here this morning. Now, Jim himself then recruited a man called Theo Cox, the late Theo Cox. Now with them and other resources that Victor could put, human resources could identify out there, carpenters and masons and so on. So Hilary, the campus proceeded with its capital projects by enormous savings by in-house construction. And this is perhaps one of the greatest features of this campus that distinguishes it from the other campuses. In that way, correctly, the Roy Marshall Teaching Complex was built at a saving of $1.2 million. Now that was possible only because Victor could have been persuaded. Man who kept money close to himself, that it was possible to deliver this project successfully in this way. But once he could be persuaded, he recognized that this sum of money would be available for another form of expansion. I say 1.2 million because the truth is that when we went to tender, the lowest tender came out to something like 4.2 million for that project. I remember Sir Keith hitting his forehead and saying, no, this can't happen. This cannot be built. But when we worked it through with Victor and Jim and so on, and I have to say that they had sufficient confidence in me to have me manage the project. We were able to construct it for something like $2.5 million. Another instance of Victor's eye for, well, I don't know if y'all know, he started a buying club here. The whole purpose of a buying club was to get what you would get on the open market for much less, which was the same thought that influenced his work in starting a credit union on the campus. But with that kind of track record, and I should say Jim had also built the first phase of the bookshop in that way, and modified the building we were in several ways, all ourselves, with little money, or as Hillary would say, no money from the government. When we got an EDF grant and loan to construct a hall of residence, the World Hall, the professionals told us that the money would build 120 beds only. We discussed it. And based on our track record up to then, the EDF agreed that we could build or would build the building, the hall ourselves in-house. In that process, we got 180 beds for 120 bed money. Now, you know, you had to persuade Victor that these things were possible because there was a big risk, and Victor would not be party to any losses on that account. I see Velma Newton here, and she would recall that it was the same approach we used to the extension of the law library. That last portion of the law library was built by the campus itself at enormous savings. And I want to be expansive here because, Victor, I feel so strongly about your contribution in harnessing our resources and allowing us to survive that I think these things must be said. The no sometimes and often offended the academics. And there may have been a notion that accountants have no sensitivity and sensibility in relation to academic matters. But really, that is not true. Not with Victor, at least. Because his prudence and tactic of saying no allowed faculties to get that additional staff member which was not provided for in the budget. So expansion was taking place, Sir Hilary, through the careful husbanding of the little resources, not often predictable either, that were coming to us. Now, this campus was ahead of the other campuses in its computerization. Now, this is Victor's foresight. Sometime, Victor decided to put aside a significant sum of money that would computerize the entire campus. And that means the laying of fiber optic means, the equipping of all offices, the equipping of computer labs right across the board. And we kept saying, but Victor, you know, a computer can only last about 3 or 4 years. But at the end of, before the end of 3 or 4 years, the computers were replaced with new ones and upgraded ones. He said, this is an academic institution and we have to be in the forefront in Barbados. I suspect Michael will speak about the library because the person who, as Woody Blackman said in his book, stood out in making a case for funds to maintain the library, in fact to provide secure funds with the library, out of competition with the other requests, was Victor Cooke. Before Finance and General Purposes Committee, it was always Victor that was saying the library and the bookshop are the lifeblood of a university. So the growth of the equipping of our library, now the Sidney Martin Library, had a lot to do with Victor going out always on a limb, because that was asking for funds in competition with funds being sought by the academics in their faculties and departments. Perhaps I should stop at that point. But I want to make one other point about his foresight and his acumen. For years we have been asking the government to give us lands contiguous to the university campus for its expansion. The idea was to allow us to take the lands contiguous to us ahead of persons who could buy the lands. We weren't successful until in recent times. But nobody knew, I suspect not even Sir Sidney knew, that 3 acres of land, is it 3? Next to us, on the south side of the campus, had become available on the market. When I tell you what land it was, you can see how competitive it would have been to acquire the land. But even before it became public, Victor had paid down on it. Sakeem spoke of his networking. Victor had a cell in the finance ministry, in the education ministry, in the accountant general, in the treasury, all over Barbados in critical places. And of course, this may have had to do also with the high profile he held in the Methodist Church. But they worked together and worked to our advantage. So the land on which the stool, the great administration building now stands, Hillary, that you now occupy, came about because of that. So it was like stealth. Now, Victor's role was in the wider community was touched on briefly. I think we need to know that we all knew at the time that Victor was a committed Christian. We thought that if you were a Methodist that you had special privilege because he was a noise in the Methodist Church, or still is. And we are told that he advanced pretty rapidly in the church from the time he must have been less than 14 or less than 12 as a chairman of the Sunday school group or some such thing, to become the initiator or collaborator with what is a terribly important institution in the Methodist Church, the stewardship arrangements. The information I received was that initiated by Victor in one church, it was then copied across the circuit, taken up, copied across the district, and finally extended across the Southern Caribbean and the Americas. And when Victor left us, I believe he became head or the treasurer of that organization. But it had to do with stewardship, husbanding what little resources you have, managing your property, and making the best use of all your resources. He was playing that role in the church. And if it spilled over at the university, we are happy. And if it spilled over from the university to the church, we are equally happy. But perhaps I should stop at that point because I want to say that I am particularly pleased that the university in Sir Hilary, we need to give considerable credit to you for this, recognizing that those who helped to build this place at this time should not go unnoticed in our 50th year. Victor, happy birthday. How was it yesterday? Thank you.
There's a quote that I came across recently on leadership. One Herbert Swappy. He said, I cannot give you the formula for success, but I can give you the formula for failure, which is to try to please everybody. And I think you demonstrated over time that you were not prepared to please everybody. You had the capacity no, and I sure we said it with a smile, so that it went down quite well. And if they were able to persuade you, then you came forward and were able to provide the funds they wanted. I think that's excellent management and leadership. The next person I'm going to invite to give remarks is Mr. Michael Gill. I have an affinity with Michael because a lot of people don't know that I was a librarian at one point. The National Library Service, I think you were the initiator of that project for the government of Barbados. So I have some research skills, so Hillary. Right, but I'm sure Michael is going to give us an expose of his relationship with Victor and related to the library especially, and I invite you to the podium to give those remarks.
It was remarked at one of the earlier naming ceremonies that most of the people who spoke seemed to be historians. And today that is true as well. So you will forgive me if I try to delve a little bit into history as well. And in doing so, I want to introduce you to my uncle Cuthbert, the eldest brother of my mother, and a family friend, Iris, who happened to be my godmother. The two of them lived on Highway 7, about 1.5 miles apart. Cuthbert lived in Hastings, obliquely opposite Hart's Gap, with his widowed mother. And Iris lived on Bay Street, just short of the Beckles Road corner, facing Browns Beach. When I visited my grandmother in Hastings, Hazelmere, the house is no longer there. It has been razed and is now part of the Coconut Court operation. But when I visited, I found it a fantastic place. To me, at 6 and 7 years old, it seemed huge. Lots of corners to explore. And because the land slopes at the back of the place, it was on several levels. The living room and the front veranda and the bedrooms were at one level. And then down below there was the dining room, and below that there was the kitchen. And then you step down again into the yard and through a gate and down onto the beach at the back. A fabulous place. And I used to enjoy visiting, except on those occasions, late in the evening, it was either 6 or 7 o'clock, I don't remember which, but Cuthbert would tune a radio to listen to the BBC News because he wanted to know how the war was going on. And because the reception was bad, everybody in the house had to be very silent so that Cuthbert could hear what was happening. When I visited Iris, she lived in a much more modest place, but it was interesting as well. The front veranda faced onto that open area, Browns Beach, and you could see much more traffic passing there, and you could see the ships in the harbor in the open roadstead at Carlisle Bay. And one day the war came to Iris's front door, because I was there when the Cornwallis was torpedoed. And as I grew up, the war linked those two people in my mind. So if I can advance you another 10 or 12 years, I get to the point where a number of us, and there are a number of faces that I see here who would be in this group, were going off to the university in Jamaica. And that Jamaica was established when it was. Because while the war was going on and London was being battered into submission, or might have been, there were people in Whitehall, not our Whitehall, but the Whitehall in London, who were considering things related to the development of university education in the West Indies. And when I think about that now, I find it quite remarkable, because these people could not have been sure that they would have had any continuing responsibility for what was happening in the colonies. But it so happened that their plans came to fruition. The university was established, and a number of us who probably would not have been able to get a university education otherwise were now on our way to Jamaica. And this is the middle 1950s now. There was another Whitehall influence which had surfaced round about this time as well. They kept thinking what they would do with these West Indian islands, and the Federation was being mooted. And although I have taken no poll, I think that I can say that a number of my colleagues who were on their way to Mona at the time would have been Federalists at heart. If I can indicate how I know that, I can say that they voted with their hearts for West Indian integration. I can think of people like Earl Newton, who is here, Woodville Marshall, who is here, some people who are not here, I mean Champaline, for example, and some folks who went further afield than just the Caribbean, Mickey, Hillary. These all voted with their hearts about integrating the West Indies, because the common feature, which I share, is that we all married people from other West Indian islands. Now, the Federation had a very brief history. By 1962, it had come to a grinding halt. And there were a number of persons who had expected a career as federal civil servants who found all of a sudden that there was no continuity in that sphere. But for one of them, our honoree today, another door opened, another regional institution. And although, as has been said earlier, it was not originally planned that a Cape Hill campus would ever have been established, the pressures on the Mona campus were such, and the political pressures from this end were such, that it was decided that a campus would be established here, the College of Arts and Sciences. And Victor was well placed, shall we say, to join that institution at the very earliest moments. We know about his work when it was only an office at the St. Michael's School. Then we know about his efforts at the Harbour site. And you have heard all the nice things that have been said about the way he conducted himself when we moved on to this campus. Now, the relationship between the library and the bursary is a special one. And in a sense, it is distinct from most of the other units on the campus in that not every order that is placed from the library department has to go through the bursary. I believe it is true that all the other departments have that restriction. But books are different, as our new registrar would know. When you want to purchase a book, you don't get 3 or 4 quotations from different suppliers, because it just doesn't work that way. So because of this arrangement, the library is given the privilege and the responsibility of placing its own orders, managing its own book vault, such as it is, and submitting invoices to the bursary when we have received the goods for the bursary to pay. Actually, in some other campuses, it goes a bit further than that. At St. Augustine, the library at St. Augustine has its own finance section, and they write their own checks. But we never asked for that here. Now, there are some things that you know not to ask for. Now, as I said, books are special. When you place an order for a book, you're never sure that you're actually going to get it. Things go out of stock, they go out of print. You ask the various booksellers to search long and hard for second-hand copies and so on, but you're never really sure until it actually arrives. So while the library is very concerned that it never overspends, the nature of the trade allows us, in a sense, to overcommit. Largely because we know that not every order that we place is going to be fulfilled. Now, on this matter of financing the library acquisitions, I had need to write recently to the press to indicate, in defense of the naming of the library in honor of Sidney Martin, to explain how he came to our rescue at a time when our finances were really under severe threat, and there was a significant undersupply of money to purchase our library materials. I spoke about how from the savings, and earlier speakers today have indicated how the savings were arrived at, how the savings were distributed when Sidney would hold his meeting of CAPEC, and I would fight with all the other academic departments for a share of these savings. I have to say today, I said in my letter to the press about Sidney's role, but I have to say today that in fact it was Victor who found those savings for us. And the way in which he did it was explained very, very nicely by some of the earlier speakers. And it may well have been that on one occasion I over-anticipated what savings I would get. But there came a day when we sent a pile of invoices over, and Victor sent them back with a little note saying, "We have no funds in the account to process these." Now, our suppliers were Blackwell's in England, Richard Abel in North America, and a few other small suppliers. But Blackwell's, who eventually bought over Richard Abel, found themselves in the position ultimately of being easily our major book dealer. And all of these invoices were due for payment at Blackwell's. And when I got the pile back from Victor, I felt it necessary to do two things. One, to write a letter immediately to Blackwell's explaining the situation and telling them that I wish them to cancel any orders which might still be outstanding. And I copied that letter to Victor because I wanted him to know that we were behaving responsibly. By return post, I got a letter from Blackwell's, very nice letter. It said, "We understand how these things can sometimes happen, and we are disregarding your instruction to cancel the outstanding order." Well, I never copied that to Victor. I never copied that to Victor. I just waited anxiously for the next session of planning and estimates to fight again for some savings so that I could handle the matter. And I did. And of course, Blackwell's remains our supplier of choice. And I'm sure that they were aware that that would have been the result when they wrote that very nice letter to me. There's very little more that I can add really to what has been said by the historians ahead of me about Victor's contribution. So I will just simply end this brief history lesson by referring again to Cuthbert and Iris. They eventually got married. But apparently it was a quite long courtship. And the folklore in the family is that on one occasion, Iris said to him, "Cuthy, when are you going to marry me?" And Cuthbert's reply was, "How would I know? Am I a prophet?" Now, that was a matter over which he had some control, and really he ought to have been able to say something positive. But when Victor started his work in life, he could not have seen that things would have so arranged themselves that he would have moved through the earlier stages of his career, a stage in which, as I said, I think he would have hoped that his career in the Federal Civil Service would have been long and satisfying. He could not have seen that, in fact, his major calling would have been here on this campus to make what all of us recognize has been a very sterling contribution to the development of the Cave Hill campus. May I thank you very much, sir, for all that you have done for this campus, and especially the support that you gave to the library.
We sometimes require our academics to reach out to the community. I don't think we emphasize it enough sometimes for our administrators. And I'm going to just read the last section of the profile of Mr. Cooke to demonstrate that he not only worked diligently on campus, but he also exceeded that remit and sought to go outside and share his knowledge and skills with the rest of the Barbadian community. Mr. Cooke also served as the director of the then Barbados National Bank and served as a member of the committee appointed by the Minister of Education to consider university financing, and by the same minister on the proposed establishment of the University of Barbados, an amalgamation of Earlston Teachers Training College and the Barbados Community College, and the Samuel Jackman Prescott Polytechnic. He's also a committed Christian. He has served the Methodist Church of the Caribbean and the Americas with distinction as Vice President, Treasurer of the Conference Funds, and Administrator of the NCCA's Superannuation Fund. He retired from that last position in 2011. So he is given to his community as well as to the university in a very significant way. We want to thank him for that. You have served us well, sir, and we are proud to include you among of those stalwarts who we've already recognized this year over the last couple of months. Keefe, Mr. Keefe, Mr. Sidney, Mr. Arrow, Leslie Robinson, Ms. Woodville. All these stalwarts we've recognized for their contribution, and you are added to that list. I now invite you to come and respond to what has been said. The only caveat is that there are no denials today.
Good morning to you all. Probably afternoon. When I finish with you, it might be night. I have so much to tell. So much that is not generally known in the country. Master of Ceremonies, and you have already been congratulated on your elevation in this institution. It's a wonderful place to work. Here, don't leave. Members of my family and friends, Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the Cave Hill campus, members of my family and friends, especially my friend of 75 years, Mr. Desmond Trotman. Desmond, please stand up and be recognized. My friend who made the journey with me from Commemoration to, of all things, testing sugarcane, you won't believe that, to CDNW, and then to the federal government, Mr. Edric Rochester, and his wife Elma, his wife Elma is a product of this space. Mr. Andrew Lewis, chair of the 50th Anniversary Committee, my long and esteemed friend. When you have Andrew Lewis as a friend, you have a good friend. And I thank you for that, Andrew. Members of the Bursary Cabinet, members of the press, colleagues, I don't know if there are any students here, but if so, I welcome them, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm humbled and pleased and excited by this very exceptional honor that will today be bestowed on old money bags. Organizations very seldom honor or recognize financial administrators after retirement. They may, of course, do so while they are still controlling the funds, perhaps in order to curry favor. However, the UWI, and in particular the Cave Hill campus, has chosen to do so 19 years after my retirement, and more particularly on this auspicious occasion while we are celebrating our 50th anniversary. I draw your attention to the pronoun we. When people ask me what I did at the university, my reply would usually be, I'm just trying to keep university spending within budget. That philosophy, if you like, seems to have resonated well, and for that I'm getting my name in hard plastic, which will, I'm told, outlast stone and metal. The timing is spot on, Mr. Principal. Yesterday I celebrated my 83rd birthday. These are some things that have to be said, so I bear you, please. Let me tell you a little about my journey from Commemoration to Cave Hill. I would like to do it in Ryan Brathwaite time, but that would not be fair to either of us. The intriguing thing about that journey is about how the dots were connected in my life. The first hurdle was getting a job after school. My grandmother, Irene Hall of blessed memory, heard from her supervisor in the hospital kitchen about a place in Hastings called Colonial Development and Welfare. None of us had ever heard about that place. My mother, bless her soul, found where it was and presented herself there the very next day. She found out the ins and outs of applying for a job. Back home, application written, submitted, and in a week I got a job at that strange and unknown place, next to the Marine Hotel. I struggled hard to understand what I had to do. After all, what did I know about files and minute sheets? Minute sheets? Something to do with the time? Oh no, you had to write words on those sheets of paper and make sure you put in the references on all correspondence. If not, all hell would break loose. And then sending out correspondence in a 5-letter code via cable and wireless. Horrors. Then another dot got connected. After 2 years as a filing clerk, the accountant migrated to the United States of America. My CV was checked and it was noted that I had an excellent grade in bookkeeping. Presto, I am the new accountant. Going to the bank to get cash to pay staff, ordering goods and services, and being faithful to the budget. I enjoyed that responsibility. It was there I discovered the power of the word no. The accountant's first line of attack. Those of you who have never heard about CDNW, It was an organization set up by the British Colonial Office to serve the British conscience and to do two things: dispense technical assistance and financial aid to the British colonies in the West Indies, long overdue, and to move them as soon as possible closer together in a federation, all 11 of them. The premiers, chief ministers such as Albert Gomes, Ebenezer Joshua, the mercurial Eric Geary, Robert Llewellyn Bradshaw, and others attended meetings of the Standing Clothes Association at CD&W under the chairmanship of the Comptroller. The delegates argued out customs union, freedom of movement, sounds familiar? Siting of the federal capital, and all the other things necessary to create a nation. Mr. Principal, the leaders missed the golden bargaining chip to talk about reparations. Yes, they would have been too timid anyhow. The upshot was that before you could blink twice, colonial federation agreed to. Guyana said they had a continental destiny and had nothing to do with it. The other 10 took the $9 million offered by the British government and started to play government in 1958. Having accomplished their mission, CD&W became history and closed operations, jobs gone. Unless staff took up an offer to work in Trinidad, the federal capital. By the way, Grant Adams tried hard for Barbados to be the federal capital, which the British favored. He even bought Accra Beach, which is now a public. It was a private beach. And Adams didn't want people in the countries to know that only white people could bathe there. But he lost out to Trinidad. All of this time, nobody had asked the people in the 10 colonies anything about how they really feel about this federation thing. Some Bajans even thought it had to do with the federation rights of the 18th century. Now, however, Great Britain had no more embarrassment at the United Nations about being questioned about their colonies in the West Indies. So bugger off, little rocks in the sea. Hurdle number 2, go to Trinidad or stay here and look for work. I and several of the staff, like my esteemed friend Eddie Rochester, who is here with us today, decided to take the pick in Trinidad. From day one, the quarreling started. Grant Adams is Prime Minister and Eric Williams, Premier of Trinidad and Tobago, only taking out his hearing aid and not listening to anybody. Only talking to the Americans about getting out of Chagaramas quickly. Election fever in Jamaica. Buster telling the Jamaicans that the people in the little islands are going to bring big trunks to Jamaica to put their money in and take it away. Buster win. And Jamaica done with that. Federation mash up because 1 from 10 equals naught. That time, I'm Assistant Accountant General in the federal government with long leave, long overdue. What happens? That job done in the federal government as well. I got a pick with the interim commission, which sorted out the final affairs of the federal government. The colonial office didn't want to give the federal public servants any compensation. See me with a big placard round the Queen's Park Savannah. A mauling by Malden. Malden was the colonial secretary. We didn't only get compensation, we got pensions as well. I still get mine up to today. I had never had paid overseas leave, so my wife Vera and I decided to get this last perk. We went to England on the Golfito with a return journey to Barbados via New York on the SS Antilles. Here now how I got over hurdle number 3. When I got to New York, there was a letter of appointment, if you please, waiting for me, signed by Fred Phillips, appointing me as accountant of the College of Arts and Sciences, Barbados, with effect from August 1963. See how I got lifted over that hurdle? Brapso, another dot connected. I didn't even know about the establishment of the College of Arts and Sciences. I had known about the University of the West Indies because it was an item in the federal budget. Zach Preston, whom you've heard so much about, used to come to Port of Spain every year to make sure that the university had its share. It was there that I met that giant of a man. Back in Barbados, wet behind the ears, I had to jump in feet first in the temporary office at St. Michael's School. So now I have a job again, another dot connected. With haste, I went to Jamaica and sat at the feet of my mentor, the same Aston Zachary Preston and his staff. Hugh Holness, Ken LaCruz, all now gone to glory, I hope. I received full cooperation from the Mona staff. I formed the impression that they were willing the College of Arts and Science to succeed. I was so anxious and nervous about my first trip to Jamaica that I forgot money and most everything else. My minders took good care of me. My first College of Arts and Science budget was $300,000. That is not even a little department now. My first cost-cutting measure was to get permission for free postage within the island. Did you ever wonder how come we don't have to pay local postage? We are still benefiting from that facility that I organized from day one. The next was duty-free concessions for all university goods. The government of Barbados was most helpful, although I seem to detect a shift in that way now. The early days at the harbor were literally tempestuous. Hurricane threatening, waves washing up, soiling the red undergraduate gowns before they were even worn. Thanks to Lowe's Laundry, everything fixed brand new in time for the first graduation with Princess Alice as Chancellor. In order to get our numbers up, the university in 1963 offered scholarships to each of the Little 8 colonies. That is how Jeffrey Delmore came and made us proud, getting the first-class honors. Since Woodville Marshall has written about the Cave Hill space, I think Keith Hunt or Tony Phillips and my friend Professor Welt should write something about the exciting times at the harbor. Example, about a man called Winston Ward, the clerk of works, with a stentorian voice. Teddy Rice's assistant, who never learned to say no. Shirley Reed Bauer, the first librarian. Joan Johnson Paris, the first principal secretary. Secretaries in those days used to take dictation and type on upstairs typewriters. Remember those? And the hand-operated Gestetner machines with blacking all over the place. Colin Ford, our right-hand man, Richard Alsop, Charles Hollingsworth, part-timers Steve Emtage and Gloria Cummins, and many others. We were like a family at the water's edge. The first Christmas party we had, Winston Ward gave us a suckling pig, complete with an apple in the snout. I could still taste it. That was proper pork. We were a small and happy family at the harbor. How did we finance the capital works at the harbor? The British government gave several CD&W grants for library books, scientific equipment, conversion of the harbor site, planning and building on this campus. A total of £400,000. And we're talking about 1963, so you know how much money that is. The Canadian government supplied all of the furniture needed, and they also built Sherlock Hall. Just a bit about some major developments at Cave Hill. The bookstore. At the harbor, Cloister Bookstore would handle everything to do with the textbooks. That arrangement went on for several years until the Cloisters wanted the university to compensate them for books not sold. Problems. In 1969-70, Mrs. Gertrude Shorey suggested to Woody Blackman, the secretary, now campus registrar, that the university could handle its own book business. She had some experience with a similar operation in Antigua and offered her help. Woody was able to secure a German benefactor who agreed to put up the capital for books and equipment for the first year. The bookstore started in an office just around about two doors down from here. The rest is history. The non-academic staff became members of the Barbados Workers' Union in the early 1970s, and there was Wiggett for the academic and senior administrative staff. The campus had to get a remit from the Barbados government indicating the range with which the campus could negotiate. Relationships with the Barbados Union were relatively cordial. Matter of fact, negotiations with Roy Trotman, as he was then, became a literary jousting, Shakespeare et al., which was most stimulating. We did have to go downtown a few times, but we were always able to meet on common ground. The nomenclature of some posts were changed through negotiations. Messengers became office assistants, maids became office attendants, and watchmen became security guards. Ordering for goods and services were done centrally, except for the library you just heard. Departments submitting indents and the bursary submitting orders based on the budget sums available. Savings were examined and as needed. Environment, this is a word I don't know if you still use, environment approved by F&GP to shore up deficiencies. And that's where we got our money from. Budgets were considered and approved by here in Cave Hill, KPEC, in Trinidad, STAPEC, and in Mona, MOPEC, for consideration by UPEC. Sidney Martin used to say, that is when we all peck. The Accounts Department held its own and got good plaudits from the Vice Chancellor, from Sir Philip Sherlock, for on-time performances and the quality of our work. We never got an adverse audit report. The staff was strengthened from the harbour by the addition of Ivy Lane Blossom, who had worked in the Mona Bursary. When her husband Clary was returning home, Zach Preston simply said to Sidney Martin, find a job for her. He said if you don't have the money, he would send it. Before the move from the harbour to the hill, Zach commandeered Blossom to go to St. Augustine to bring their accounts up to date and to put them on the right track. You all hear that? Big up Blossom, please. As the College of Arts and Science became a campus in 1970 with the advent of the Faculty of Law, the bursary was reorganized. Morris Webster joined us, and a few years later we pinched Carlyle Asu from St. Augustine, only to have him pinched from us by the CDB. Then Anis Delrimple joined us. The success of the bursary was built on teamwork, with supervisors giving full rein to manage their divisions. Every Friday morning at 10 o'clock, the cabinet would meet, rain falling, sun shining. Glossop in charge of payments and other charges. Marion Ford, salaries and related expenses. Eleanor Small, special projects. And Pat Corbing, minutes and administration. When Morris Webster, Carlette Asu, and Anis came on board, they too were members of the cabinet. There was a structured agenda in the form of questions, and everyone had to give an account of their stewardship during the week past. You hear them laughing? We organized very lucrative sources of income, which came from the 10% surcharge on all special projects. I don't know if that happened, but that was a tremendous source of income. And it wasn't budgeted income, as well as the interest earned on consumption and car loans. You still get those things? Good. All right. Because we used to charge 4% interest. You still charge interest? But then it came to a time when 4% wasn't covering it, so we finished with that. Several developments on the campus, academic, such as the teaching of biology and accounting. We tried year after year to get the government to fund those two. Nothing doing. So we decided that we can fund ourselves. Capital projects, and you heard about these from Andrew, such as the purchase of the principal's house at Rouen and the land on which the Golden Stool is constructed, were the beneficiaries of that special project's money. So too was the furniture and equipment for the Chronic Disease Center. I thought I'd mention that because I never hear Professor Fraser mention that at all. That the government gave them the building at Enmore, but then Professor Henry Fraser knew at the time, said, but we have no furniture. So why you leave it to us? We will deal with that. And so we furnished that building. The biggest challenge during my watch was the 1974 squeeze resulting from the crazy oil prices. Things were tight, money was very scarce. This called for a daily monitoring of cash balances. Every morning, first thing, Blossom Lane would report to me on the bank balances. Then decisions would be taken as to who would get paid, what, and when. However, we were never late with the payment of salaries. Special arrangements were made with NIS and the Indian Revenue about payments due to them. That was their money, and if they didn't pay us, we pay them. I enjoyed my work in the bursary. I took a year's sabbatical in 1968-69 when I attended Waterloo Lutheran University in Canada. Blossom held the fort with very minimal supervision from Mona. I am convinced that the university ranks very highly as one of the premier employers in this country. During my years, only one person resigned to take up another work in the country, and no one was fired. Persons left to go abroad, but none left. Of course, many were pinched by other departments. Well, with Marshall over, I pinched Grace. I thank my colleagues in the bursary, Maurice, Annis, Blossom, Marion, Eleanor, and Pat Corbett, and before them, Marjorie Maxwell and Grace Franklin. Is Grace here? Yes, and Grace Franklin. All of the other staff for their selfless devotion to the bursary, and through that, to the university, as the premier educational institution in the Caribbean. Sometimes my staff might refer inadvertently to the university as they. My correction will always be sharp and swift. We. This honor that you clothe me with today is more theirs than mine. The bursary organized a massive buying club that you heard about, with monthly orders reaching as much as $50,000. It became too large for the little space we had and could no longer be handled by volunteer help. Professor Binks did a database program for the club, and as you guessed it, Blossom was the chief cook and bottle washer. From the ashes of the buying club arose the UWI Credit Union. Mr. Principal, I'm very pleased to see the developments which have taken place since I left. US, which is the University of West Indies Seniors, had to ask Andrew Lewis to give us a tour of the campus, which he did, and brought us up to date on present and future developments. We have been blessed as a campus by excellent principals. Leslie Robinson, the Pathfinder, getting the academic program off the ground. Sidney Martin laid the foundation for teaching and research and the building of this campus. Keith Hunt, the consolidator and developer, and now Hilary Beckers, the expansionist and the creative imaginer. Don't be dismayed, Principal. Your dream about one student in every household will come to pass sooner or later than you think. Keep creating and keep imagining. In conclusion, I give thanks to my God for taking me over the hurdles, connecting the dots, and for the blessings which he has bestowed on me, unworthy as I am. I thank my family, my late wife Vera of blessed memory, my present wife Claudette. I keep wondering how one man could be so blessed. My children Alvin and Yolan, and my grandson Alex, who is training at the Caribbean Maritime Institute in Jamaica, and Rinaldo, who is here and became a student on this campus in September this year. I'm happy and contented in my retirement. Like St. Paul in his discourse to the people of Corinth, I can say with assurance and boldness, by the grace of God, I am what I am. But perhaps not the same assurance and boldness with the remainder of the stanza, which says, and his grace towards me was not in vain. Because of this function, I know that my work on this campus was not in vain, and for that I am very thankful. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience. God bless you all, and bless the Cave Hill campus and the university.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooke. An expose of the life of a truly Caribbean icon who's contributed at the local level at the domestic level in terms of UWI, at the local level in terms of Barbados, and at the regional level in terms of the Federation. So he's a person who has been able to share his knowledge and skills across the region to the benefit of all of us and the benefit of mankind. Thank you very much for coming and sharing with us this morning. And because we can give people accolades, but if you don't turn up, we can't really give it to them. So I want to thank you very much for being part of this process and your family for supporting you this morning. And it's just left for us now to go outside and basically cut the ribbon to name the building. And we want to thank you for the life of service for this university and the region. Thank you.